How's it going, everybody? Going to be reading The Black of the Berry by Wallace Thurman. I'm going to have these videos into, I'm going to hope, parts. And I'm not going to read it all in one sitting, but yeah, put it in parts. Because I found there was a lack of audio narration. And for myself, I'm very good in audio narration. So I thought I'd participate in helping people out as well as helping myself out. All right, let's start. Part one, Emmylou. More accurately than ever before, Emmylou began to feel that her luscious black complexion was somewhat of a liability, and that her marked color variation from the other people in her environment was a decided curse. Not that she minded being a Negro necessitated having a colored skin, but she did not mind being too black. But she, oh, sorry, um, but she did mind being too black. She couldn't understand why such should be the case, couldn't comprehend the cruelty of the NATO attenders who had allowed her to be dipped, as it were, in indigo ink when there were so many more pleasing colors on nature's palette. Biologically, it wasn't necessary either. Her mother was quite fair, so was her mother's mother, and her mother's brother, and her mother's brother's son, but then none of them had a black man for a father. Why had her mother married a black man? Surely there had been some eligible brown skinned men around. She didn't particularly desire to have a high yaller father, but for her sake, certainly some more happy medium could have been found. She wasn't the only person who regretted her darkness either. It was an acquired family characteristic, this moaning and grieving over the color of her skin. Everything possible had been done to alleviate the unhappy condition. Sorry. Every suggested agent had been employed, but her skin, despite bleachings, scourgings, and powderings, had remained black, fast black, as nature had planned and effected. She should have been a boy. Thin color of skin sorry, wouldn't have mattered so much. For her mother, I mean, for wasn't her mother always saying that a black boy could get along, but that a black girl would never know anything but sorrow and disappointment? But she wasn't a boy, she was a girl, and color did mattered so much that she would rather have missed receiving her high school diploma than have to sit as she now sat, the only odd and conspicuous figure on the auditorium platform of the Boise High School, or the boys' high school. Why had she allowed them to place her in the center of the first row? And why had they insisted upon her dressing entirely in white so that, surrounded as she was by similarly attired, pale faced fellow graduates, she resembled, not at all remotely, that comic picture her Uncle Joe had hung in his bedroom? The picture wherein the black, kinky head of a little red lipped pickaninny lay like a flat like a fly in a pan of milk in a white expansive bedclothes, amid a white expansive bedclothes. But she, of course, did not. Couldn't have worn blue or black when the call was for wearing of white, even if white was not complimentary to her complexion. She would have been odd looking anyway, no matter what she wore, and she would have also have been conspicuous. For not only she the only dark skinned person on the platform, she was also the only Negro pupil in the entire school, and had been for the past 4 years. Well, thank goodness, the principal would soon be through his with his monotonous farewell address, and and the other members of her class would advance to the platform center as their names were called and received the documents which would signify their unconditional release from the public school. As she thought of these things, Emmylou Grace glanced at those who sat to the right and to the left of her. She envied them for their obvious elation, yet felt a strange sense of superiority because of her immunity for what for the moment from her ephemeral mob emotion. Get a diploma? What did it mean to her? College? Perhaps. A job? Perhaps again. She was going to have a high school diploma, but it would mean nothing to her whatsoever. The tragedy of her life was that she was too black. Her face and not her slender roll of ribbon round parchment was to be her future identification tag in society. High school diploma indeed. What she needed was an efficient bleaching agent and magical cream that would remove this unwelcome black mask from her face and make her more like her fellow men. Emmylou Morgan, she came to with a start. The principal had called her name and stood smiling down at her benevolently. Someone, someone, she knew it was her cousin Buddy, stupid imp, applauded her very faintly, very provokingly. Someone else snickered. Emmylou Morgan. The principal had called her name again, more sharply than before, and his smile was less benevolent. The girl who sat to the left of her nudged her. There was nothing else for her to do but to get out of that anchoring chair and march forward to receive her diploma. But why did the people in the audience have to stare so? Did they all know that Emmylou Morgan was Boise High School's only nigger student? Didn't they all know? But what was the use? She had to go get that diploma. So summoning her was most insultant manner. She advanced to the platform center, brought every muscle of her lithe limbs into play, haughtily extended her shiny black arm to receive her proffered diploma, bowed a chilly thanks, then holding her arms stiffly at her sides, sullenly returned to her seat in that foreboding white line, insolently returned once more to splotch its pale purity and to mock it with her dark, outlandish difference. Emmylou had been born in a semi-white world, totally surrounded by an all-white one, and those few dark elements that had forced their way in had either been shooed away or else greeted with derisive anger. Derisive laughter. It was the custom always of those with whom she came into most frequently contact to ridicule or revile any black person or object. A black cat was a harbinger of bad luck. Black crepe was an insignia of mourning. And black people were either evil niggers with poisonous blue gums or else typical vaudeville darkies. It seemed as if the people of her world never went halfway in their recognition or reception of things black, for these things seem always to call forth only the most extreme emotional reactions. They never provoked mere smiles or mere melancholy. Rather, they were the signal either for boisterous go-offs or guffles or pain-induced and tear-tinted grief. Emmylou had been becoming increasingly aware of this for a long time, but her immature mind had never completely failed its full to her tragic significance. First, there had been the case of her father, old black Jim Morgan, they called him, and Emmylou had often wondered why it was that he, of all people she heard discussed by her family, should always be referred to as if his very blackness condemned him to receive no respect from his fellow men. She had also begun to wonder if it was because of his blackness that he had never been in evidence as far as she knew. Inquiries netted very unsatisfactory answers. Your father is no good. He left your mother, deserted her shortly after you were born. And these statements were always prefixed or followed by some epithet such as dirty black no gooder or darn his ornery black hide. There was in fact only one member of the family, who did not speak of her father in this manner, and that was her Uncle Joe, who was also the only person in the family to whom she felt akin, because he alone never seemed to regret, to bemoan, or to ridicule her blackness of skin. It was her grandmother who did all the regretting, her mother who did the bemoaning, her cousin Buddy and her playmates, both white and colored, who did the ridiculing. Emmylou's maternal grandparents, Samuel and Maria Lightfoot, were both mulatto products of slave day promiscuity between male masters and female chattel. Neither had been slaves, their own parents having been granted their freedom because of their close connections with the white branch of the family tree. These freedmen had migrated into Kansas with their family, with their children. And when these children had grown up, they had joined the Westward Ho parade of that current era and finally settled in Boise, Idaho. Samuel and Maria, like many others of their kind and antecedents, had only one compelling desire, which motivated their every activity. It dictated their every thought. They wished to put as much physical and mental space between them in the former home of their parents as was possible. That was why they had left Kansas. For in Kansas, there are too many reminders of that which their parents had escaped from and which they wished to flee. Kansas was too near the former slave belt, too accessible to disgruntled Southerners, who, deprived of their slaves, were inculcated with an easily communicable virus, nigger hatred. Then, too, in Kansas, all Negroes were considered as belonging to one class. It didn't matter if you or your parents had been freedmen before the Emancipation Proclamation, nor did it matter that you were almost three-quarters white. You were, nevertheless, classed with those hordes of hungry, ragged, ignorant black folk arriving from the South in such great numbers, packed like so many stampeding cattle in dirty, manure littered boxcars. From all this, these maternal grandparents of Emmylou fled, fled to the Rocky Mountains, states which were too far away for the recently freed slaves to reach, especially since most of them believed that the world ended just a few miles north of the Mason Dixon line. Then, too, not only were the Rocky Mountain states beyond the reach of this raucous and smelly rabble of recently free cotton pickers and plantation hands, but they were also peopled by pioneers, sturdy land and gold seekers. From the east, marching westward, always westward in search of El Dorado, and being too busy in this respect to be violently aroused by problems of race unless economic factors precipitated matters. So Samuel and Maria went into the farness of a little known Rocky Mountain territory and settled in Boise, at the time nothing more than a trading station for the Indians and whites, and a red light center for cowboys and sheep herders and miners in the neighboring vicinity. Samuel went into the saloon business and grew prosperous. Maria raised a family, began to mother nuclear elements for a future select Negro social group. There was, of course, in such a small and haphazardly populated community, some social intermixture between whites and blacks. White and black gamblers rolled the dice together, played tricks on one another while dealing faro, Faro, and became allies in their attempts to outfigure the roulette wheel. White and black men amicably frequented the saloons and dance halls together. White and black women leaned out of the doorways and windows of the jerry built frame houses and log cabins of Horror Row White and black housewives gossiped over black fences and lent one another needed household commodities. But there was little social intercourse on a higher scale. Slewfoot Sal, the most high popular high yaller on Horror Row, might be a buddy to Irish Peg and Blonde Liz, but Miss Amos James, whose husband owned the town's only dry goods store, could certainly not become too familiar with Samuel Lightfoot, colored, whose husband owned a saloon. And it was not a matter of the difference in their prospective husbands' businesses. Miss Amos James did not associate with Mr. Arthur Amory White, whose husband also owned a saloon. It was purely a matter of color. Emmylou's grandmother, then holding herself aloof from the inmates of Horror Row and not wishing to associate with such as old Mammy Lewis's daughters, who did most of the town wash, and others of their ilk, was forced to choose her social equals slowly and carefully. This was hard, for there were so few Negroes in Boise anyway, that wasn't much cream to skim off. But as the years passed, others who, like Maria and her husband, were mulatto offspring of mulatto freedmen seeking a freer land, moved in and were soon initiated into what was later to be known as the Blue Vein Circle, so named because all of its members were fair skinned enough for their blood to be seen pulsing purple through the veins of their wrists. Emmylou's grandmother was the founder of the acknowledged leader of Boise's Blue Veins, and she guarded its exclusiveness, sorry, passionately and jealously. Were they not a superior class? Were they not a very high type of Negro compared to the persons of color groups in the West Indies? And were they not entitled ipso facto to more respect and opportunities and social acceptance than the more pure-blooded Negroes? In their closely in their veins was some of the best blood of the South. They were closely akin to the only true aristocrats in the United States. Even the slave masters had been aware and acknowledged in some measure their superiority. Having some of Mars Georgia's blood in their veins set them apart from ordinary Negroes at birth. These mulattoes, as a rule, were not ordered to work in the fields beneath the broiling sun at the urge of a Simon Legree lash. They were saved and trained for more the gentle jobs. Say, saved and trained to be ladies, maids, and butlers. Therefore, let them continue this natural division of Negro society. Let them also guard against unwelcome and degenerating encroachments. Their motto must be wider and wider every generation, until their grandchildren of the blue veins could easily go over into the white race and become assimilated, so the problems of race would plague them no more. Maria had preached this doctrine to her two children, Jane and Joe, throughout their apprentice years, and can therefore be forgiven for having a physical collapse when they both, first Joe, then Emmylou's mother, married not mulattoes, but a copper brown and a blue black. This had been somewhat of a necessity, for when the mating call had made itself heard to them, there had been no eligible blue veins around. Most of their youthful companions had been sent away to school or else to seek careers in the eastern cities, and those who had remained had already found their chosen life's companions. Maria had sensed that something of a kind might happen and urged Samuel to send Jane and Joe away to some Eastern boarding school, but Samuel had stubbornly refused. He had his own notions of the sort of things one's children learned in boarding school and of the greater opportunities they had to apply that learning. True, they might acquire the same knowledge in the public schools of Boise, but then there would be some limit to the extent to which they could apply this knowledge, seeing they lived at home and perforce must submit to some parental supervision. A cot in the attic at home was to Samuel a much safer place for a growing child to sleep than a iron four poster in a boarding school dormitory. So Samuel had remained adamant, and the two carefully reared scions of Boise's first blue vein family had of necessity sought their mates among the lower orders. However, Joe's wife was not as undesirable as Emmylou's father, for she was most almost three quarters Indian, and there was scant possibility that her children would have revolting dark skin, thick lips, spreading nostrils, and kinky hair. But in the case of Emmylou's father, there were no such extenuating characteristics, for his physical properties undeniably stamped him as a full blooded Negro. In fact, it seemed as if he had come from one of the few families originally from Africa who could not boast of having been seduced by some member of aristocracy or befriended by some member of a strolling band of Indians. No one could understand why Emmylou's mother had married Jim Morgan, least of all Jane herself. In fact, she she hadn't thought much about it until Emmylou had been born. She had met Jim at a church picnic given in a woodlawn meadow on the outskirts of the city. And almost before she had realized what was happening, she had found herself slipping away from home night after night to stroll down a well shaded street known as Lover's Lane with the man her mother had forbidden her to see. And it hadn't been long before they had decided an elopement would be the only thing to assure themselves the pleasure of being together without worrying Mama Lightfoot's wrath, talkative neighbors, prying town marshals, and grass stains. Despite the rancor of her mother and the whispering of her mother's friends, Jane hadn't really found anything to regret in her choice of a husband until Emmylou had been born. Then all the fears her mother had instilled in her about the penalties inflicted by society upon black Negroes, especially upon black Negro girls, came to the fore. She was abysmally stunned by the color of her child, for she had been certain that since she herself was so fair that her child could not possibly be as dark as as its father, she had been certain that it would be a luscious admixture, a golden brown with all its mother's desirable facial features, and his mother's hair. But she hadn't reckoned with nature's perversity, nor had she taken under consideration the inescapable fact that some of her ancestors, too, had been black, and that some of their color chromosomes still embedded within her. Emma Lou had been fortunate enough to have hair like her mother's, a thick, curly black mass of hair, rich and easily controlled. But she had also been unfortunate enough to have a face as black as her father's, and a nose which would not, while not exactly flat, was distinctly negroid as her two thick lips. Her birth had served no good purpose. It had driven her mother back to seek the confidence and aid of Maria, and it had been given Maria the chance she had been seeking to break up the undesirable union of her daughter with what she termed an ordinary black nigger. But Jim's departure hadn't solved matters at all. Rather, it had complicated them. For although he was gone, his child remained, a tragic mistake which could not be stamped out or eradicated even after Jane, by getting a divorce from Jim and marrying a red haired Irish Negro, had been accepted back into Blue Vein Grace. Emmylou had always been the alien member of the family and of the family social circle. Her grandmother, now a widow, made her feel it. Her mother made her feel it, and her cousin, Buddy, made her feel it, to say nothing of the way she was regarded by outsiders. As early as she could remember, people had been saying to her mother, "What an extraordinary black child. Where did you adopt it? Or else, such lovely, unniggerish hair on such a niggerish looking child." Some had even been facetious and made suggestions like, "Try some lye, Jane. It may eat it out. She can't look any worse." Then her mother's remarriage had brought another person into her life, a person destined to give her, while still a young child, much pain and unhappiness. Aloysius McNamara was his name. He was the bastard son of an Irish politician and a Negro washerwoman, and until he had been sent east to a parochial parochial school, Aloysius, so named because his father's middle name had always been known as Aloysius Washington, and the identity of his own father had never been revealed to him by his proud and humble mother. But since his father had been prevailed upon to pay for his education, Aloysius's mother thought it was a proper name to tell her son of his true origin and to let him assume his real name. She had hopes that away from his hometown, he might be able to pass for white and march unhindered by the bars of color to fame and fortune. Excuse me. But such was not the case. For Emmylou's stepfather was so conscious of the Negro blood in his veins and so bitter because of it that he used up whatever talents he had, groaning inwardly at capricious fate and planning revenge upon the world at large, especially the black world. For it was Negroes and not whites whom he blamed for his own, to him, life's tragedy. He was not fair enough of skin, despite his mother's and his own hopes to pass for white. There was a brownness in his skin inherited from his mother, which immediately marked him out and for what he was, despite the red hair and the Irish blue eyes, and his facial features had been modeled too generously. He was not thin lipped, nor was his nostrils as delicately chiseled as they might have been. He was a Negro. There was no getting around it, although he tried every possible way to do so. Finishing school, he had returned west for the express purpose of making his father accept him publicly and personally advance his career. He had wanted to be a lawyer and figured that his father's political pull was sufficiently strong to draw him beyond race barriers and set him as one apart. His father had not been entirely cold to these plans proposals, but his father's wife had been. She didn't mind her husband giving his this nigger bastard some of his money and receiving him in his home on rare and private occasions. She was trying to be liberal, but she wasn't going to have people point and say, "That's Boss McNamara's wife. Wonder if that nigger's son is his'n or hers." They do say, so Aloysius had found him shunted back into the black world he so despised. He couldn't be made to realize that being a Negro did not necessarily indicate that one must be a ne'er do well. Had he been white, or so he said, he would have been a successful criminal lawyer. But being considered black, it was impossible for him ever to be anything more than a Pullman car porter or a dining car waiter. In acting upon this premise, he hadn't tried anything else. His only satisfaction in life was the pleasure he derived from insulting and ignoring the real blacks. Persons of color, mulattoes were all right, but he couldn't stand detestable black Negroes. Unfortunately, Emmylou fell into this latter class and suffered at his hands accordingly until he finally ran away from his wife, Emmylou, Boise, Negroes, and all, and ran away to Canada with Diamond Lil of Horro. Summer vacation was nearly over, and it had not yet been decided what to do with Emmylou. Now that she had gra- graduated from high school, she herself gave no help nor offered any suggestions. As it was, she really did not care what became of her. After all, it didn't seem to matter. There was no place in the world for a girl as black as she anyway. Her grandmother had assured her that she would never find a husband worth a dime, and her mother had said again and again, "Oh, if you had been a boy." Until Emma Lou had often wondered why it was that people were not able to effect the change of sex or at least a change of complexion. It was her Uncle Joe who finally prevailed upon her mother to send her to the University of Southern California, USC, in Los Angeles. There, he reasoned, she would find a larger and more intelligent social circle. In a city the size of Los Angeles, there were Negroes of every class, color, and social position. Let Emma Lou go there where she would not be as far away from home as if she were to go to some Eastern college. Jane and Martha, while not agreeing entirely with what Joe said, were nevertheless glad that at least something which seemed adequate and sensible could be done for Emma Lou. She was to take the 4 year college course, receive a bachelor degree in education, then go south to teach. That that they thought was a promising future. And for once in the 18 years of Emmylou's life, everyone was satisfied in some measure. Even Emmylou grew elated over the prospects of the trip. Her Uncle Joe insistence upon the differences of social contracts in larger cities intrigued her. Perhaps he was right after all in continually reasserting to them that as long as one was a Negro, one specific color had to do with one's life. Salvation depended upon the individual, and he told Emma Lou during one of their usual private trips that it was only in small cities one encountered stupid color prejudice, such as she had encountered among the Blue Vein Circle in her hometown. People in large cities, he had said, are broad. They do not have time to think of petty things. The people in Boise are 50 years behind the times, but you will find that Los Angeles is one of the world's greatest and most modern cities, and you will be happy there. On arriving in Los Angeles, Emmylou was so busy observing the color inhabitants that she had little time to pay attention to other things. Palm trees and wild geraniums were pleasant to behold, and such strange phenomena as pepper trees and century plants had to be admired. They were very obvious and they were also strange and beautiful, but they impinged upon only a small corner of Emmylou's consciousness. She was mi- minutely aware of them, necessarily took them while in passing, viewing the totality without pondering over or lingering to praise their stylistic details. They were, in this instance, exquisite theatrical props rendered insignificant by a more strange and more beautiful human pageant. For Emmylou, who in all her life had been seeing over 500 Negroes, the spectacle presented by a community containing over 50,000 was sufficient to make relatively commonplace many more important and charming things than the far famed natural scenery of Southern California. She had arrived in Los Angeles a week before resignation day at the university and had spent her time in being shown and seeing the city. But whenever these sightseeing excursions took her away from the sections where Negroes lived, she immediately lost all interest in what she was being shown. The Pacific Ocean itself did not cause her heartbeat to quicken, nor did the roaring of its waves find an emotional echo within her. But on the coming of Bruce's Beach for colored people near Redondo, or on the little ship Sandy Shore that they had approached for themselves at Santa Monica, the Pacific Ocean became an intriguing something to contemplate as a background for their activities. Everything was interesting as it was patronized, reflected through, or acquired by Negroes. Her Uncle Joe had been right. Here, in the colored social circles of Los Angeles, Emmylou was certain that she would find many suitable companions, intelligent, broad minded people of all complexions, intermixing and being too occupied otherwise to worry about either their own skin color or the skin color of those around them. Our Uncle Joe had said that Negroes were Negroes, whether they happened to be yellow, brown, or black, in a conscious effort to eliminate the darker elements would neither prove nor solve anything. There was nothing quite so silly as the creed of blue veins, whiter and whiter every generation. The nearer white you are, the more white people will respect you. Therefore, all white Negroes marry light Negroes, continue to do so generation after generation, and eventually, white people will accept this racially bastard aristocracy, thus enabling those Negroes who really mattered to escape the social and economic inferiority of the American Negro. Such has been the credo of her grandmother and of her mother and of the small circle of friends in Boise. But Boise was a provincial town, giving to the molding of the provincial people with provincial minds. Boise was a backward town, out of the mainstream of modern thought and progress. Its people were cramped and narrow, their intellectual concepts stereotyped and static. Los Angeles was a happy contrast in all respects. On registration day, Emmylou rushed out of the campus of the University of Southern California 1 hour before the registrar's office was scheduled to open. She spent the time roaming around, familiarizing herself with the layout of the campus and learning the names of the various buildings, some old and vine clad, others new and shiny in the sun. And watching the crowd of laughing students rushing to and fro, greeting one another and talking over their plans for the coming school year. But her main reason for such an early arrival on campus had been to find some fellow Negro students. She had heard that there were to be quite a number enrolled, but in her hour's stroll, she saw not one, and finally disheartened, she got into the line stretched out in front of the registrar's office, and for the moment became engrossed in becoming a college freshman. All the while, though she kept searching for a colored face, but it was not until she had been duly signed up as a student and sent in search of her advisors that she saw one. Then, three colored girls had sauntered into the room while she was having a conference with her advisor, sauntered in, arms interlocked, greeted her advisor, then sauntered out again. Emma Lou had wanted to rush after them to introduce herself, but of course, it had been impossible under the circumstances. She had immediately taken a liking to all three, each of whom was what it was known in the parlance of the black belt as high brown and modishly shingled, bobbed hair, and well formed bodies fashionably attired in flashy sport garments. From then on, Emmylou paid little attention to the business of choosing subjects and class hours, so little attention, in fact, that the advisor thought her exceptionally tractable and somewhat dumb. But she's like students to come that way. It made the task of being advisor easy. One just made out of the program to suit oneself and had no tedious explanations to make as to why the student could not have such and such a subject at such and such an hour, and why such and such professor's class was already full. After her program had been made out, Emma Lou was directed to the bursar's office to pay her fees. While going down to the stairs, she almost bumped into two dark brown skinned boys, obviously brothers, if not twins, arguing as to where they should go next. One insisted that they should go back to the registrar's office. The other was being equally insistent that they should go to the gymnasium and make an appointment for their required physical examination. Emmylou boldly stopped when she saw them, hoping they would speak, but merely glanced up at her and continued their argument, bringing cards and pamphlets out of their pockets for reference and guidance. Emmylou wanted to introduce herself to them, but she was too bashful to do so. She wasn't yet used to going to school with other Negro students, and she wasn't exactly certain how one went, how one went about becoming acquainted. But she finally decided she had better let the advances come from the others, especially if they were men. There was nothing forward about her, and since she was a stranger, it was no more than right that the old timers should make her welcome. Still, if she had been girls, still, if these had been girls, they wouldn't. But they weren't. Sorry, but they weren't. So she continued her way down the stairs. In the bursar's office, she was somewhat overjoyed at first to find that she had fallen into line behind another colored girl who had turned around immediately and, after saying hello, announced in a loud, harsh voice, "My feet are some tired." Emma Lou was so taken aback that she couldn't answer. People in college didn't talk that way. But meanwhile, the girl was continuing, ain't this registration a mess?" Two white girls who had fallen into line behind Emmylou snickered. Emmylou answered by shaking her head. The girl continued, "I've been standing in line and clumbing stairs and talking and singing till I'm just about done for. It is tiresome." Emmylou returned softly, hoping the girl would take a hint and lower her own strident voice, but she didn't. "Tiresome ain't no name for it," she declared more loudly than ever before. Then, "Is you a new student?" "I am," answered Emmylou, putting much emphasis on the "I am." She wanted the white people who were listening to know that she knew her grammar as if this other person didn't. "Is you?" Indeed. If this girl was a specimen of the Negro students with whom she was to associate, she most certainly did not want to meet another one. But it couldn't be possible that all of them, those three girls and those two boys, for instance, were like this girl. Emmylou was unable to imagine how such a person had ever gotten out of high school. Where on earth could she have gone to high school? Surely not in the North. Then she must be a Southerner. That what she that's what she was, a Southerner. Emmylou curled her lips a little. No wonder the colored people in Boise spoke as they did about Southern Negroes and wished that they would stay South. Imagine only one preparing to enter college saying, "Is you," and make it worse. Right before all these white people, the staring white people, so eagerly and ready to laugh, Emmylou's face burned. Two more. Then I goes in my sock. Emmylou was almost at the place where she was ready to take even this statement literally and was on the verge of leaving the line. Supposing this creature tonight go in her sock. God forbid. Wonder where all the spades keep themselves. I ain't two sides you. Seen but two sides you. I really do not know, Emily returned precisely and chillily. She had no intentions of becoming friendly with this sort of person. Why would she be ashamed even to be seen on the street with her, dressed as she was in a red striped sports suit, a white hat, and white shoes and stockings? Didn't she know that black people was to be careful about the colors they affected? The girl had finally reached the bursar's office and was paying her fees and loudly differing the cashier about the total amount due. I tell you, I ain't got that much. She shouted through the window bars. I figured it up myself before I left home. The cashier obligingly turned to her adding machine and once more obtained the same total. When shown this, the girl merely grinned, examined the list closely, and said, "I'm gonna pay it, but I still think you're wrong." Finally, she moved away from the window, but not before she had turned to Emmylou and said, "You're next," and then proceeded to wait until Emmylou had finished. Emmylou vainly sought some way to escape, but was unable to do so, and had no choice but to walk with the same girl to the registrar's office, where they had their cards stamped and returned for the bursar's receipt. This done, they went into the campus together. Hazel Mason was the girl's name. Emmylou had fully expected it to be either hyacinth or geranium. Hazel was from Texas, Prairie Valley, Texas, and she told Emma that her father, having become wealthy when oil had been found on his farmlands, had been enabled to realize two life ambitions, obtained a Packard touring car, and sent his only daughter to a first class white school. Hmm. Emma Lou had planned to loiter around the campus. She was still eager to become acquainted with the colored members of of the student body, and this encounter with the crass and vulgar Hazel Mason had only made her more eager. She resented being approached by anyone so flagrantly inferior, anyone so noticeably a typical Southern darky, who had no business obtruding into a more refined scheme of things. Emma Lou planned to lose her unwelcome companion somewhere on campus so that she could continue unhindered her quest for agreeable acquaintances. But Hazel was so anxious to meet one as Emma Lou, and having found her, was not going to let her get away without a struggle. She too was new to this environment, and in a way was more lonely and eager for the companionship of her own kind than Emma Lou, for never before had she come into such close contact with so many whites. Her life had been spent only among Negroes. Her fellow pupils and teachers in class had always been colored, and as she confessed to Emma Lou, she couldn't get used to all these white folks. "Honey, I was just aching to see blackface," she had said, and though Emma Lou was experiencing the same ache, she had found herself unable to sympathize with the other girl, for Emma Lou had classified Hazel as a barbarian who had most certainly not come from a family of best people. No doubt her family had. I mean, so no, sorry. No doubt her mother had been a washerwoman. No doubt she had innumerable relatives and friends, all as ignorant and ugly as she. There was no sense in having a face as ugly as Hazel's, and Emmylou thanked her stars that though she was black, her skin was not as rough and pimply, nor was her hair kinky, nor was her nostrils completely flattened out until they seemed to spread all over her face. No wonder people were prejudiced against dark skinned people when they were so ugly, so haphazard in their dress, so boisterously mannered, as was this present specimen. She herself was black, but nevertheless had come from a good family, and she could easily take her place in society as of the right sort of people. The two strode along the long board gravel path which led to a vine colored building at the end of the campus. Hazel never ceased talking. She kept shouting at Emmylou, shouting all sorts of personal intimacies as if they were desirous of the whole world hearing them. There were no necessity for her to talk so loudly, no necessity for her to afford every one on the crowded campus the chance to stare and laugh at them as they passed. Emma Lou had never been so humiliated and so embarrassed. She felt as if she must get away from her offensive companion. What did she care if she had to hurt her feelings to do so? Excuse me. The more insulting she could be now, the less friendly she would have to be in the future. Goodbye, she said abruptly. I must go home, with which she turned away and walked rapidly in the opposite direction. She had only gone a few steps when she was aware of the fact that the girl was following her. She quickened her pace, but the girl caught up with her and grabbing hold of Emmylou's arm shouted, "Whoa there, Sally." It seemed to Emmylou as if everyone on the campus was viewing and enjoying this minstrel like performance. Angrily, she tried to jerk away, but the girl held fast. "Girl, you sure walk fast. I'm going your way. Come on, let me drive you home in my buggy." And still holding on to Emmylou's arm, she led the way to the wide street where the students parked their cars. Emmylou was powerless to resist. The girl didn't give her a chance, for she held tight, then immediately resumed the monologue for which Emmylou's attempted leave talk taking had interrupted. They reached the street, Hazel still talking loudly and making elaborate gestures with her free hand. "Here we are," she shouted, and releasing Emmylou's arm, salamed before sport salamed before a sport model struts roadster. "Oscar," she continued, "meet the girlfriend. Meet the new girlfriend." Pleased to meet you," says he. "Climb aboard." And Emmylou had climbed aboard, perplexed, chagrined, thoroughly angry, and disgusted. What was this little black fool doing in a Stutz Roadster? And of course, it would be painted red. Negroes always beckon themselves in their belongings and ridiculously unbecoming colors and ornaments, and seem to be a part of their primitive heritage, which they did not seem to have a sense to forget or deny. Black girl, white hat, red and white striped sports suit, white shoes and red stockings, red roadster. The picture was complete. All Hazel needed to complete her circus-like appearance, thought Emmylou, was to have some purple feathers stuck in her hat. Still talking, the girl unlocked and proceeded to start the car. As she was backing it out of the narrowing parking space, Emmylou heard a chorus of semi-suppressed giggles from a neighboring automobile. In her anger, she had failed to notice that there were people parked in the car next to the Stutz. But as Hazel expertly swung her machine around, Emmylou caught a glimpse of them. They were all colored and they were all staring at her and Hazel. She thought she recognized one of the girls as being one of the group, and had seen earlier that morning, and she recognized the two brothers had passed on the stairs. And as the roadster sped away, their laughter echoed in her ear. although she hadn't actually heard it, but she had seen the strain on their faces, and she knew that as soon as she and Hazel were out of sight, they would give free rein to their suppressed mirth. Although Emmylou had finished registering, she returned to the university campus on the following morning in order to continue her quest for collegiate companions without the alarming and unwelcoming presence of Hazel Mason. She didn't know whether to be sorry for the girl or to or I mean and try to help her or to be disgusted and avoid her. She didn't want to be intimately associated with any such vulgar person. It would damage her own position, cause her to be classified with some one who was in a class by herself. For Emmylou was certain that there was not and could not be anyone in the university just like Hazel, despite but sorry, but despite her vulgarity, the girl was not all bad. Her good nature was infectious. Emmylou had surmised from her monologue on the day before how utterly unselfish a person she could be and was. All of the store of the world's goods were at hand to be used and enjoyed by her friends. They were not, as she had said, a selfish bone in her body. But even that did not alter the disgusting fact that she was not one who would be welcomed by the right sort of people. Her flamboyant style of dress, her loud voice, her raucous laughter, and her flagrant disregard or ignorance for English grammar seemed inexcusable to Emmylou, who was unable to understand how a person could stray so far from the environment in which she rightfully belonged to a first class university. She, sorry, uh, in, who was unable to understand how such a person could stray so far from the environment in which she rightfully belonged to enter a first class university. Now, Hazel, according to Emmylou, was the type of Negro who should go to a Negro college. There were plenty of them in the South whose standard of scholarship was not beyond her ability. And and then in one of those schools, her darky like clownishness would not have paraded in front of white people, thereby causing discomfort and embarrassment to others of her race, more civilized and circumspect than she. The problem irritated Emmylou. She didn't see why it had to be. She had looked forward so anxiously and so happily to her introductory days on the campus, and now her first appearance with one of her fellow college students had been an unpleasant one. But she did not intend to let that make her unhappy. She was determined to the campus alone, seek out other companions, see whether they accepted or ignored the offending Hazel, and govern herself accordingly. It was early, and there were a few people on the campus. The grass was still wet from a heavy overnight dew, and the sun had not yet dispelled the coolness of the early morning. Emma Lou's dress was of thin material, and she shivered as she walked or stood in the shade. She had no school business to attend to. There was nothing for her to do but to walk aimlessly about the campus. In another hour, Emma Lou was pleased to see that the campus walks were becoming crowded and that the side streets surrounding the campus, were now heavy with student traffic. Things were beginning to awaken. Emma Lou became jubilant and walked with jaunty step from path to path, from building to building. And then occurred to her that she had been told there were more Negro students enrolled in the School of Pharmacy than in any other department of the university. So, finding the pharmacy building, she began to wander through its crowded hallways. Almost immediately, she saw a group of 5 Negro students, 3 boys and 2 girls, standing near a water fountain. She was both excited and perplexed, excited over the fact that she was so close to those she wished to find, and perplexed because she did not know how to approach them. Had there been only one person standing there, the matter would have been comparatively easy. She could have approached with a smile and said, "Good morning." The person would have returned a greeting, and it would have been a simple matter to get acquainted. But five people in one bunch, all known to one another, and now chatting intimately together, it would seem too much like an intrusion to go bursting in to their gathering, too forward and too vulgar. Then there was nothing she could say after having said good morning. One just didn't break into a group of five and say, "I'm Emmylou Morgan, a new student, and I want to make friends with you." No, she couldn't do that. She would just smile, and as she passed, smile graciously and friendly. They would know that she was a stranger, and that her smile would assure them that she was anxious to make friends, anxious to become a welcome addition to their group. One of the group, one of the group of five had sighted Emmylou as soon as she had sighted them. "Who's this?" queried Helen Wheaton, a senior in the College of Law. Some new pick, I guess," answered Bob Armstrong, who was Helen's fiance and a senior in the School of Architecture. "I bet she's going to take pharmacy," whispered Emil Splain. "She hottentot enough to take something," mumbled Tommy Brown. "Thank God she won't be in any of our classes, eh, Amos?" Emmylou was almost abreast of them now. They lowered their voices and made a pretense of mumbled conversation amongst themselves. Only Vern Davis looked directly at her, and it was she alone who returned Emmylou's smile. "What you grinning at?" Bob chided Vern as Emmylou passed out of earshot. "At the little frosh, of course." She grinning at me. I couldn't stare at her without returning it. I don't see how anybody could even look at her without grinning. "Oh, she's not so bad," said Vern. "Well, that's bad. Well, she's bad enough. That makes two of them." "Two of what, Amos?" "Hottentots, Bob." "Good grief!" exclaimed Tommy. "Why don't you recruit some good-looking co-eds out there?" "We don't choose them," Helen returned. "I'm going to the southern branch, where the sight of my fellow female students won't give me dyspepsia." "Ta ta, Amos," said Vern, "and you needn't bother to sit in my car anymore if you think us so terrible." She and Helen walked away, leaving the campus boys to discuss the sad days which had fallen upon the campus. Emmylou, of course, knew nothing of all this. She had gone her way of rejoicing. One of the students had noticed her, had returned her smile. Excuse me. This getting acquainted was going to be an easy matter after all. It was just necessary that all the exercise a little patience was it was just necessary that she exercise a little patience. One couldn't expect people to fall all over one without some preliminary advances. True, she was a stranger, but she would show them in good time that she was worthy of their attention and that she was a good fellow and a well-bred individual, quite prepared to be accepted by the best people. She strolled out onto the campus, again trying to find more prospective acquaintances. The sun was warming now, the grass dry, and the campus overcrowded. There was an infectious germ of youth and gladness abroad to which Emmylou could not remain immune. She was certain that she felt the presence of that vague something known as college spirit. It seemed to enter into her, to make her jubilant and set her very nerves tingling. This was no time for sobriety. It was the time for youth's blood to run hot, the time for love and sport and some wholesome fun. Then Emmylou saw a solitary Negro girl seated out on a stone bench, and it did not take a second to decide what to do. Here was her chance. She would make friends with this girl, and should she happen to be a new student, they could become friends and together find their way into the inner circle of those colored students who really mattered. All right, this is going to be the end of this part one of this guest reading series, audiobook series, whatever you want to call it. Black of the Berry by Wallace Thurman. Reached about page 22, and then I'll be continuing on from there. All right, you guys be good. Have a good day. God bless. Bye.